Hello children, welcome to social e-learning session, and this is Priya from Alpha Group of Institutions, and today we are going to discuss chapter 4 in history. In the last session we have completed geography, right? Geography chapter 3, I think so. And today we are going to discuss chapter 4 in history, that is tribals, Dikus and the vision of a golden age. Children, who are tribals, Dikus, and the vision of a golden age? Today, we all lead a very comfortable life in the cities with all the facilities available to us. But do you know there are some people who still live in forest, and those people are known as tribal people. And well, in this chapter, we will discuss and learn about some of the tribes of our country and their struggle against the Dikus. Dikus means those who are outsiders for these tribals. The tribals means the people who live in the forest, and Dikus means the people who live outside the forest. It means like us. So these are the tribals, those whoever, for the tribals mindset, whether it is a British or African or an Indian, whoever it may be, if they are not belonging to the forest, they are out of the forest, they are coming from out of the forest, they are called Dikus. So today we are going to talk about tribals, Dikus and the vision of golden age. We are going to look what happened in the golden age. Okay. Now, the tribals, Dikus and the vision of a golden age. In 1895, a man named Birsa was seen roaming the forests and villages of Chota Nagpur in Bihar. People said he had lived in Bihar. People said he had miraculous powers. He could cure all diseases and multiply grains. Birsa himself declared that God has appointed him to save his people from trouble, free them from the slavery of Dikus. Soon thousands of people began following Birsa, believing that he was Bhagavan. Bhagavan means God, and had come to solve the problem. He was Bhagavan who had come to solve the problem. Birsa was born in a family of Mundas, a tribal group that lived in Chota Nagpur. But his followers included other tribals of the region, Santals and Urans. All of them in different ways were unhappy with the changes that were experiencing and the problem they were facing under British rule. Their familiar ways of life seemed to be disappearing, their livelihood under the threat, and their lifestyle. Okay. And here are the questions like, what problems did Birsa set out to resolve? Who were the outsiders being referred to as Dikus, and how did they enslave the people of the region? What was happening to the tribal people under the British? How did their life change? These are the some of the questions that we are going to read about in this chapter. Okay, children. So when we are talking about Birsa, this man is Birsa Munda. So in 1895, a man named Birsa, and he was belonging to Munda's tribe, which started gaining popularity. Many people believed that he had magical powers with which he could cure diseases and multiply grains. He himself, he declared himself as he is the God, he is a person that God had appointed him to help the people, and save them from their interests from the outsiders. Outsiders means Dikus. And Birsa was born in Munda tribe, which is found in Chota Nagpur region of Jharkhand, but was also famous among other tribes such as Santals and Orayons. Now, why Birsa declared that he would help tribals and save them from Dikus? Who were these Dikus? Yes, here the Dikus are referred as whom? Like Dikus, at that time Dikus are Britishers. They are calling Birsa, according to Birsa Munda's their tribe people, Dikus are only the one who is like they are Britishers. They felt Britishers as Dikus. Dikus means outsiders. And why did they want to safeguard themselves from the Britishers? Why did they want to safeguard from the Britishers? Because these tribes had their own way of living. Their society beliefs were different from those who lived in cities or villages. Yes or no? It is really true. Because the people who are living in the tribes, forest area, their lifestyle is totally different when comparing to the people who are living in the society and even along with the beliefs also. They felt that they were being enslaved by the Dikus. They felt like the Britishers are treating them as slaves. To know more about them, we have to read this chapter further, more and more. And that is why these are the questions which we are going to discuss in the chapter. And that tribal societies has different rituals which were not similar to that of the Brahmins. They didn't have any social divisions. They didn't have any social divisions. This is the life of tribal, the tribal life. Most tribal customs and rituals that were very different from those laid down by the Brahmins. These societies did not have the sharp social divisions that were characteristics of caste societies. All those who belonged to the same tribe thought of themselves as sharing common ties kinship. However, this did not mean that there were no social and economic differences within tribes. Okay, now listen. So the tribal societies, what they had different rituals which were not similar to that of the Brahmins. They did not have any social divisions on the basis of the caste. So people belonging to same tribes often thought of sharing some like whatever they are having, they used to share between themselves. However, these tribes had some social and economic differences. So let's see how the tribal groups live. How the tribal groups live. So how did tribal groups live? Some were cultivators, that is shifting cultivation, and this was done on small patches of land, mostly forest. The cultivators cut the tree tops to allow sunlight to reach the ground and burn the vegetation on the land to clear it for cultivation. They spread the potash from the fire which contained potash to fertilize the soil. They broadcast the seeds, that is scattered, like they scattered the seeds on the field instead of plowing the land and sowing the seeds. Once the crop was ready and harvested, they moved to another field. They moved to another field. It means the tribes had different ways of living. These tribes, for example, these Mundas, right? These have these tribes were having so many different ways of living and their activities also differed from each other. And let us see how it differs. It means they practiced shifting cultivation. What did they practice? They practiced shifting cultivation. And this was done on like who practiced it means cultivators. Cultivators means these cultivators only practiced like shifting cultivation. This was done on small patches of land within the forest by clearing them. And under this system, trees were cut from the top in order to bring sunlight to the ground. Land was cleared by burning the vegetation, and ash was scattered on the ground to increase the fertility of land, and then seeds were scattered. So after harvesting, the land was left fallow in order to allow it to gain fertility, and cultivation was done on another piece of land. So these type of cultivators were found in hilly areas. These type of zoom cultivators were found in hilly areas and the northeastern forest and central India. Okay. So after this, let us discuss about the hunters and gatherers. Some were hunters and gatherers. In many regions, tribal groups lived by hunting animals and gathering forest produce. They saw the forest essential for survival. The Nords of Orissa were such a community. They regularly went out on collective hunts and then divided the meat among themselves. They ate and fruits and roots collected from the forest and cooked food with the oil they extracted from the seeds of sal and mahua. They also sold the forest produce in the local markets. Now, when we talk about the hunters and gatherers, in many tribes, people survived by hunting and gathering forest produce. And cons, the cons of Orissa follow this practice. They are dependent on the forest produce such as fruits, roots, meat from hunting and oil. Like they used to they depend on fruits and roots from the plants, meat from hunting, and oil from flowers such as mahua. They used to get the oil from which flowers? Mahua flowers. For medicines, they relied upon forest shrubs. For medicines, they relied upon forest shrubs and herbs and sold forest produce in the local markets. The weavers and leather workers used to buy palash and kusum flowers from cons to dye their clothes and leather. Sometimes they exchanged their goods for the things they were in need of, just like barter system. In some cases, they had to do some labor work and also to earn their living. Tribes like Baigas from central India never worked for anyone. It was below the dignity of Baigas to do labor work, as they were the forest men who had to depend only on forest produce for their survival. Okay, these are the things, the information which were collected about the hunters and the gatherers. Now, some herded animals. Some herded animals. Many tribal groups lived by herding and rearing animals. They were pastoralistic. They were pastoralists who moved with their herds of cattle, of sheep, according to the season. When the grass in one's place was exhausted, they moved to the other places. The Vangajars of the Punjab hills and the Labadis of Andhra Pradesh, it is Lambadis, okay, not Labadis of Andhra Pradesh, were cattle herders. The Gaddis of Kulu were shepherds, and the Bakarwalas of Kashmir reared goats. Reared goats. Okay. So about animal herding. Some of the tribes used to herd animals. They used to raise animals and rear cattle. They were pastoralists who moved with their cattle and sheep from one place to another after the grass of the particular land has exhausted. You can see people who were just moving from one place to another place because in that place there is no grass remaining. So in order to search for some other glass in some other area, they used to move their houses. It means they shift their living place. Okay. And like when they were exhausted, they moved their cattle and sheep from one place to another after the grass of the particular land has exhausted. The Vangajas of Punjab and Labadis of Andhra Pradesh were cattle herders, and the Gaddis of Kulu were shepherds, and Bakarwalas of Kashmir, as the name suggests, reared the goats. Not all the people were living a nomadic life. Some of them settled down at some particular places where they had settled down. So, not all the whole the tribal people were shifting from one place to another, going here and there. But let us see what is that, because only shifting here and there, but some used to just live in the same place where they were, and let us read about them also. Okay. Some took settled cultivation. Even before the 19th century, many from within the tribal groups had begun settling down and cultivating their fields in one place year and after year. Year and after year. So they began to use plow and gradually got rights over the land they lived on. In many cases, like the Mundas of Chota Nagpur, the land belonged to the clan as a whole. All members of the clan were regarded as descendants of the original settlers. One who had first cleared the land. Very often, some people within the clan acquired more powers than others, and some became chiefs and other followers. Powerful men often rented out their land instead of cultivating it themselves. British officials saw settled tribal groups like the Gonds and Santals as more civilized than hunter-gatherers or shifting cultivators. Those who lived in the forest were considered to be wild and savage. They needed to be settled and civilized. You can see the picture of the Gonds also. These are the people who belongs to Gonds. Many of the tribal groups began settling down and started cultivation with plowing. This means now these people, they do not involve in shifting, they do not encourage in shifting cultivation, because they got the right over the land. They used to buy the land, they got the ownership of the land where they were cultivating. In the case of Munda tribes, the land was owned by the whole clan, the whole group of the people, and there were only some instances where someone acquired more power than others. And here they were referred to as a person who were buying so much of land, and that person will be referred as a chief, and who had special rights that he could even rent out his land instead of cultivating himself. And according to the Britishers, Santals and Gonds were more civilized than the hunters and shifting cultivators. Okay. Those living in the forest were considered wild and cruel. The people who were traveling here and there, shifting from here and there, they were considered as a weak people, and the people who were staying in the same place and owning their own land will be considered as the strongest one, and they are considered to be the wild and cruel people according to the Britishers. So now we know that the tribals had different ways of living, isn't it? But what made them against the Dikus? Everybody were having different types of lifestyles. They chose different places and they were living peacefully. But all the tribals hate the Britishers and they were against the Britishers. Why? Because let us see in the next topic. How did the colonial rule affect tribal life? It means how did the colonial rule affect tribal life? Because the lives of tribal people changed a lot. The living system, lifestyle of the tribal people changed a lot during the British rule. How? That we have to see now. Okay. Now here, what happened to the tribal chiefs? It means tribal heads. So according to the Britishers rule, when Britishers rule came, how the Britishers rule affected the tribals' life, we have to see in this now. And what happened to the heads of the tribal people? What happened to the tribal chiefs? We are going to learn in this. Let us have a look on this now. Before the arrival of the British, in many areas, the tribal chiefs were important people. They enjoyed a certain amount of economic power and had the right to administer and control their territories. In some places, they had their own police and decided on the local rules of land and forest management. Under the British rule, the function and powers of the tribal chief changed considerably. They were allowed to keep their land titles over a cluster of villages and rent out lands, but they lost much of their administrative powers and were forced to follow laws made by British officials in India. They also had to pay a tribute to the British and discipline the tribal groups on behalf of the British people. They lost the authority they had earlier enjoyed amongst their people and were unable to fulfill their traditional functions. Unable to fulfill their traditional functions. So, before the arrival of the British, in many areas, the tribal chiefs had their own way of importance, their own importance. They had some economic powers and also control over the territories under them. Okay, they used to have the control over the areas around them, and they have the controls of some places under them. And during the British rule, they lost uh, they lost some powers. At some places they had their own policy. They used to maintain some policy in some places also, these chiefs. But during this rule, what happened? They lost some of their powers and they were allowed to keep control. These chiefs are allowed to control over their village and rent their lands also. But they lost their head post. They lost their authority, they lost their administrative powers, and they were forced to follow only the laws that were given by the British rules. They have to follow only the British rules. They were forced to discipline tribal groups as per the Britishers, as per their laws, and they have to pay to the Britishers also for that. And these chiefs, they lost their authority over their own people, their own tribes, their own groups, and they were not able to perform some of their traditional functions also. They are not able to celebrate or participate in some traditional functions. And after this, next came the problem with shifting cultivation. These problems are first with the people who were staying in their own places. Next, the problems came with whom? With shifting cultivation. What happened to shifting cultivation? The British were uncomfortable with groups who moved about and did not have a fixed home. They wanted tribal groups to settle down and become peasant cultivators. Settled peasants were easier to control and administer than people who were always on the move. The Britishers also wanted a revenue source for the state. So, they introduced land settlements, that is, they measured land and fixed the revenue demand for that state. Revenue demand for that state. Some peasants were declared landowners, others as tenants. The tenants were to pay rent to the landowner, who in turn paid revenue to the state. The British effort to settle Zoom cultivators was not very successful. Settled plough cultivation is not easy in areas where scarce, water is in scarcity and the soil is dry. In fact, Zoom cultivators who took to plough cultivation often suffered since their fields did not produce good yields. So, the Zoom cultivators in northeast India insisted on continuing with their traditional practice. So, here the British were of the view that shifting cultivators should settle down at a fixed place. These Britishers felt that the people who were just changing one place to another place for this cultivation and all, the Britishers felt that they must not change here and then, they have to stay in one place. They wanted them to work like peasant cultivators, as it was easy to control and manage them, administer them, show the authority on the settled peasants. The British wanted regular inflow of income, so they measured the land and fixed the revenue. The rights over the land were defined. Some of the people were declared owners and other the tenants. We have read this earlier, right? The British effort to settle Zoom cultivators was not very successful for some reasons, and those reasons were plough cultivation was not successful in dry areas where water was not available, and some of them faced difficulty with plough cultivation because their fields did not give good yield because there is less fertility, and therefore Zoom cultivators of northeast insisted on, they just forced, they requested, they demanded on shifting cultivation. And as usual, the Britishers, after facing against the problems from these Zoom cultivators, they just allowed them to continue with the practice on some patches of forest land. They just allowed them to shift. Then still what else was affecting their life? When the Britishers gave the permission to do all those things, still what else was affecting their life to stand against the Britishers? Shall we have a look at this, children? Facing widespread protest, the British had to ultimately allow them the right to carry on shifting cultivation in some parts of the forest. Now, I think these things we have to uh, continue in the next class, children. Okay. So, let us continue with the next class. Let us stop discussing along with the forest laws and their impacts first. Forest laws and their impacts. I will just give a small intro and then I will finish it off with it. Okay. Forest laws and their impact. The British extended their control over all forests and declared that forests were state property. Some of the forests were classified as reserved forests for their produced timber, which the British wanted. In these forests, people were not allowed to move freely, practice Zoom cultivation, collect fruits or hunt animals. Many were therefore forced to move to other areas in search of work and livelihood. But once the British stopped the tribals from living inside the forest, they faced a problem. From where would the forest department get its labor to cut trees for railway sleepers and to transport logs? Colonial officials came up with a solution. They decided that they would give Zoom cultivators small patches of land in the forest and allow them to cultivate these on the condition that those who lived in the villages would have to provide labor to the forest department and look after the forest. So in many regions, the forest department established forest villages to ensure a regular supply of cheap labor. Many tribals reacted against the colonial forest laws. They disobeyed the new rules, continued with practices that were declared illegal and at times rose in open rebellion. The revolt of Sangma is in 1906 in Assam and the forest satyagraha of the 1930s in the central provinces are the examples for these things. So the British people, they gained control all over the forest and declared them as state property. They also formed some rules and regulations. Some forests were declared as reserve forests as the timber was needed by the Britishers. No one was allowed to move freely in such forests. Fruit collection, animal hunting and zoom cultivation was banned. This made the life of tribals miserable. So they had to move to other places in search of work. But was it beneficial for Britishers? Yes, they also, because even though it is beneficial on one hand, on the other hand, they also face the problems of non-availability of laborers. The workers were not available for their own work in these forests, such as cutting of trees, transporting logs, etc. So what happened? They came up with the idea of like providing zoom cultivators with small patches of land in the forest with the condition of providing workers, labors during their hour of need. Whenever they were needed, they used to take the help of those laborers, zoom cultivators. So in many regions, forest department established forest villages for regular supply of cheap labor. But some of the tribes were not happy with these restrictions and so they started disobeying rules which sometimes resulted into revolts. And Songram Sangma revolt of Assam in 1906 is one such example. And not only these children, there were some other problems also. These are not only the problems, still we have so many problems which they had faced. Okay, that thing let us discuss in the next class. Yes, children, with this we have completed chapter 4 in history, that is tribals, Dikus and the vision of the golden age. And your today's homework is, children, there are some fillers and some true or false in the textbook. Complete the exercises and then I think there are only 4 question answers in this. So don't forget to write the class work and then start reading from now itself so that you will feel very easy for the unit test. So don't forget to fill the blanks and true or false in the textbook. Don't write them in the classwork. And then later you have to write the classwork and read it as usual. Write a home test and post it in the group. Okay, children. With this, we have completed the first half of chapter 4 in history. So still we have remaining half to discuss with. Let us discuss the remaining half of the social, the tribals, Dikus and the vision of a golden age in the next session. Okay, children. So hope you all will complete the homework and submit it as usual in the group. So thank you for being with me. Thanks a lot. This is Priya signing off from Alpha Group of Institutions. Thank you guys.